Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in India. I can't thank my host, Jeneffer, for all of the work that was involved in getting me here. All of my friends and colleagues from India say that every artist who comes here falls in love with it, and I already have, so perhaps I can extend my stay. I'm delighted to speak on beauty, form, and function. I think form and function really is beauty. When I think of what's beautiful to me, though, I think of, well, first let me backtrack a bit. Most of my clients are scientists and engineers, being in San Francisco, and that's also something I was always very interested in since I was a child, was science and art. And so San Francisco was really the ideal place for me, and the clients that evolved out of San Francisco were a perfect fit. And what's beautiful to me is Google, who launched Project Loon, and what they did is they sent huge balloons that provided Wi-Fi to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has now been without power for almost a year now. A third of the island still doesn't have power. But to have these balloons provide internet when you're living without electricity and you can't really afford to just drive somewhere because you don't know if you'll drive to get gas and they won't have gas. And, basic things like food, shelter, your gas, we're not even talking about clothing or education at this point. So Project Loon is what's beautiful to me about design. Another aspect that came out, and it also was part of the situation in Puerto Rico, was Elon Musk's the Tesla batteries that were sent there to provide electricity, essentially, for the island. A third of the island still doesn't have electricity. But those two solutions, innovations, which are relatively new, and design, are the most beautiful things to me about design. Another thing that's come on my radar that I'm really fascinated by is these Chinese scientists have found a fungus that's they found it in Pakistan that actually eats plastic. So when you think of the plastic in the world that is in the waters and the oceans overrun, what will come out of the solutions that are developed by this are amazing and beautiful to me. I, unfortunately, don't do any of that, but I have clients who do that. So to speak about beauty, form, and function within experiments is something I'm delighted to do. I'm not going to show a lot of work. It's on my website, jeneffersterlingdesign.com, but I'm going to show you how I think and the experiments that, I just call them experiments because it's something I'm doing and I know I'll use it someday for something. So as designers, what we do is either we sell a product or we sell a message. What I'm interested in, and I think what more and more design is geared towards, is their message is always wrapped into their product now. So, for instance, this is a large poster I did for a museum exhibit. It's called The Politics of Discontent, and the theme was broken promises. Now, this poster is about 8 by 6 feet, but the verbiage that I used for this poster is all the verbiage of the initiatives of the United Nations, and which is, climate change, famine, women's rights, NGOs, the protections between different states, terrorism. The list it's not endless, but it's into the thousands. So I used all of and those words as far as messaging is something that designers, we deal with all of the time, and it was really important to me. So when I was doing this poster, I listed all of that, but then I had the types fall, conceptually, this is how the poster works. All of the type, it's about 8-point type, and then it falls out of it, so you see it trickling out, and the last words are broken promises, which the red slash mark is, for me, an indication of countries, my country, any country, who doesn't put the rights of humans, children, anyone, the climate, before. Those are the people who have broken promises. So that poster became something that I tended to use throughout all of my workshop or various things that were representative of my studio. So I'm just going to show you how I've used this type in a few pieces, and then I'm going to switch over to some very early work and experiments. This is a poster for the Michael Graves School of Architecture. It's the Creativity Conference. And I wanted, again, I used the verbiage from the United Nations, but it's all slightly off center. The paragraphs are broken. And the reason for that was not just to indicate, how Michael Graves does his buildings, but also how designers, we deal with this messaging, but our job is to put those, to line them up, to make it sync, to make all of our messages come together. We're not here to draw. I mean, that's a given. We're paid to think. Again, another poster in which I'm using this verbiage. This, however, was an early illustration. It's not necessarily about what was occurring at the time, because this was in 2016, but the actual illustration for the typography was meant to represent 9/11. Again, just another experimentation with the type. Again, for my poster, but this is, this was a point where I started to want to make type move. I like things that when you expect them to be stagnant actually feel like they can move, because it's so easy to make something move now, but to look at something and see movement. So this to me feels like, do you have Venetian blinds here or something like that? Or think of thread, if you were trying to just grab a handful of thread and pull it up. I'm just initially starting to play with this. Okay, this is where I'm going to stop and pause because it's a different part of the presentation. Okay, the color, and now we're going into Flash. This is part of my earlier website, but when Steve Jobs had that tiff with Adobe, Flash suddenly didn't work on any of the iPhones, and so, of course, my website had to change. But I still show bits of this because they were really tutorials for clients. And clients like to, at that time, in the early stages of web design, it was really about stickability or creating a buzz or having this user experience, and not user experience and ease of use, but just sort of a playground. It was more word of mouth. So I realized even for my own brand, I had to fight one thing. People said my type was too small. So I realized that was the first obstacle I would have to create. So this is how you would go through this portfolio. It has a magnifying glass. So this shows the category, this shows the individual projects, and this shows what it was and who it was for. So this first one is for Dboss. And so if you go through it, which is basically a CD, which seems, that's how long ago it was. But it was a CD for a band. So, so you basically scroll through the subcategories this way, and then you can read what it's about. If you want to go into a different section or more packaging. So this is how it works. This isn't on my site, but if anyone emails me, I'll send them the HTML file on it, and I'll give you the passwords to get back into it. So it's pretty extensive, but I wanted to show you that because it initially just started out as an experiment. With clients, and I love clients, I love to hear everything that they have to say about their project makes my job so much easier than a client that's open-ended, like do whatever you want. But something that has a very specific goal is perfect for me. But there are some times where you know you have to educate a client, but you don't want to come off as pedantic and you don't want to make it a struggle. You want to show them something educational, but in a fun way. So obviously, I mean, this is a bit, let's be nice and call it 90s looking, but so I would have changed the design. But what I'm showing them through this video is that if you make one small change from, I give them, you know, several different videos, several different graphics, and several different sound. But if they change one aspect of it, it changes the whole mood of the video completely. So they realize by asking for this small change, it actually is a huge change. And, but it's a tutorial that gets them to learn this in a polite, fun way, which I think is the most engaging way and helpful way to have a relationship with a client. So, this is where the colors are really off. So you can pick several different videos and choose from them. Okay, this is where the color becomes off. So all of these bars, basically the client can scroll through, they can see the graphics that they're seeing or changing. They can see how the color affects it, if it's script, then if it's sound. Sound isn't working.
Really not geared for your bumping and jogging. It's geared for you to think. So some of the music
Hey Charles, this your mom. Hey Charles, this your mom.
Okay, Charles.
Hey Charles, this your mom.
Some of the music we play is really not geared for your bumping and jogging. It's geared for you to.
So with all of that, they get ideas of how long something takes, or just how one simple change will change the whole feeling of something. So, you know, in my spare time, what I call experiments, to me, it's not work. It's just what I do all the time. Now, this section is deconstructing type, and I build typefaces, but. And I would be more successful if I built a whole typeface, but usually what I'll do is build a specific word for a client, for a project, and haven't mastered that business acumen quite yet. But, and I don't mean for the second visual to be offensive. It's just the first question I always ask whenever I enter an environment. Most of these typefaces I designed myself. I'll tell you when I haven't. Is this full size? Now, this I actually started with a typeface, so I can't claim that that I designed this type. But, and also, these experiments, I don't feel like these are finished pieces of art or work. Like the early posters I was showing, I feel that those are finished. These are just, I'm looking at type and thinking, what do I want that's missing or that I don't normally do, or that I might want someday. So this says Deconstructing Type. Again, Deconstructing Type. Now, this, it's actually all typography. And what I wanted to see if I could do was to see if I could make it ripple or make it feel like it was rolling, but when in all one continuous line of type. And again, this is the same sort of thing. This is not a typeface I designed. This, I don't even remember what I used here. But again, what I'm doing is showing deconstructing type, but also seeing how it'll bend or fold again. I don't know that, I wouldn't use this as a final piece, but if I was talking about fluctuations in something, or if I was talking about, you know, the rhythm or economic cycles or something like this, then this conceptually might come into play. Again, this says deconstructing type. What led me to think about this, do you know what an Etch-a-Sketch is? It's a childhood game from Mattel. I used to love this when I was like 4 years old. It's this red thin box with a screen that you can do horizontal and vertical lines, but if you're really good and can maneuver, I discovered you could do diagonal lines. So, but what I liked about it was that you shook it and it disappeared. Okay, so this is what led to this type. I know it doesn't look anything like it, but I wanted to look at deconstructing type and then look at it as it started to fall apart, and then the lines actually started to fall apart. I think I've got the basic premise of how I want it to look, but I want it to feel much more distressed and have more movement. It's on the right track, but it's not there yet. But I wouldn't use it like this for art anyway. I would just use it for maybe a political word, a statement that's showing, who knows, falling apart of a certain government, impeachment, something like that. This is, so that type, this is a typeface I designed. This again, also the colors is really off here. It's more of a mango color, but this again is a typeface I designed. I don't tend to do a lot of, and I don't know why, I don't tend to do a lot of circular or very rounded things, and so I wanted to try to see if there was something that I liked, and I can also see this actually having movement as far as the dots going around or being part of a navigation in a piece. So I think there's a possibility for this to be of use to me or for a client. Again, deconstructing type. Also, I don't do a lot of script type, mainly just because there's so many people who do it so much better than I do. And so, but I was looking at deconstructing type here, and all of these pieces eventually, and you'll see, even though I'm showing pieces that aren't finished, you'll see in later, I selected a few that from these experiments I've actually used part of them, but I'm not showing a lot of the my actual work. I think I have about 4 projects I'm showing because you could see that all on your phone or, on my site. So, but the back end of a lot of this isn't on my site, and there isn't really an explanation as why it's there. Again, this is Deconstructing Type and Love, but both of the typefaces I designed. I don't do, I keep saying I don't do a lot of dimensional type, I don't do a lot of this type, so I'm left thinking, well, what do I do? But, so this was just another experiment. And I actually like the block face of the word love better, so I think that that's something that I'll explore. So this is a whole different direction than looking at type that is actually feels fluid or feels like water. So experimenting with that. The word flout is actually based on a real typeface, but what I'm doing is having it become more and more minimal. Okay, you can see it as it drops down. It's easier for me to build it very complex and then break it down instead of building it from a minimal stage and expanding it. I don't know why. This was my poster for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It's also hand-done type. The one thing I like about this poster is that it's one of the largest letterpress. I know, isn't that the strangest thing to like about the poster? But it's they had to create a special blanket, and a lot of my work is very tactile. I mean, obviously the print work is tactile. It's one of the things I miss in all of my digital work. So I try and make the digital work, if it calls for something to be organic, to have it be organic. And I try and make it lose the sterility that you can see a lot of times online. Another typeface, another experiment, a little clearer. This was actually one of the first pieces I did when I opened my studio, and it's a huge poster, but it's all printed on vellum. And I guess I included it because it's one of the very first pieces I did. You can tell it's early work because it actually says annual reports. So I did a whole series for San Francisco performances. This is, we're getting into some actual pieces here, and there were 5 for a series of their, this was Wim van der Mills and Ultima Vest, and their bus shelter size, which is about 4 by 6 feet. And the client called me and said, they're very, very successful, but there's a huge problem. And I said, why? What's happened? And they said, well, it's so, the cost of it. And I said, it was pro bono. And they said, no, but everyone's breaking the bus shelters open and stealing the posters. So they had to replace all the bus shelters around the city. But it was a successful poster, I guess, in relative terms. This is for SCI-Arc, which is Southern California Institute of Architects, and this was their fall poster. Again, all the posters I do are very large. I love scale on a poster. Okay, I wanted to, sorry, I don't have these in order. I have another SCI-Arc poster I'll talk about. And originally, so now I'm going into, I've started with typographic explorations, but a lot of my work has texture, or even if there's a line in it, I've probably physically drawn it, an ink drawing, but just to escape, even though everything's digital, but I'll draw the line with ink, photograph it with my phone, put it in. I literally don't move from a location. Everything's like right here, draw, photograph, bring it in, change it. Either I'm incredibly resourceful or incredibly lazy, I'm not sure. But these pieces that I've started on you know, to me, they're art unless a client has paid for them. So these I've done for myself. This is an actual large piece that ended up being used for a client. Again, this is something I created. It's also with pen and ink. I really am just thinking about buildings when I draw something like this. Again, just another drawing. Again, all of these are quite large. Most of them are about 60 inches across. If they're paintings, if they're ink, they're smaller. This is actually a digital piece, but I wanted to take a look at, I mean, to me now it looks like tweed. That's all I kind of think about. But I was thinking more about abstract art during the 60s, which is a period that I love. Again, just more different kinds of work. I don't know what this will become when I made it. Now that it's there, I see it as certainly something involving the environment, but I also see it perfectly for a perfume packaging. I could see it in that realm too. So I don't know what it'll grow up to be, so to speak. Again. Okay. Sometimes there are things that are so ugly they're cool, and in America they used to have these picnic tablecloths that were this like, and they only came in red and blue, and they were kind of like they were definitely plastic on one side and felt on the other. So I just wanted to see if I could create it one day. I couldn't bring myself to use the red and blue that they ended up using, but I knew I was intrigued by it, and so that's usually what gets me started on something. And so then I had a client, and I wanted to be able to print on that material, the actual picnic tablecloth. This is for a book. It's a man and a fish and a love story. So here you see maybe where some things come together. The E down there on the bottom of the script is actually that script typeface that I made. This background is the picnic table material, but I've changed it to sort of a blush shade. Now, I know that a lot of times the materials that I want I can't afford, so if I can't afford them, I want to make them. And this I actually, and if I make it with a photograph, it's not going to have the same quality because it won't have, if I want it to be an emboss in certain places, it won't have that same textural feel. So I have the background of the, so you can actually see that it has texture, and so it's printed. It's printed, and then it has an aqueous coating, but then on top of it, all the artwork is a matte, one color match color. So it ended up, for something that could have been a very expensive job, a very inexpensive job. And to me, knowing all about production, online, and printing is everything, because it tells you where you can cut corners. And people think that I either have great clients or I have a ton of money. Well, I do have great clients, but, and I tell them they can pay me more if they wish, but, I really try and streamline a job so where I know where to cut money and where not to cut money. This is the other poster for SciArc. Now, the colors are really off here. They're incredibly too saturated. So if you think about, if you move the saturation scale about 7%, you'd get more of the tone. But I created this for Southern California Institute of Architects, but for this conference, what they were looking at as far as architects was not just your traditional architects, but your landscape architect, your online architect, your textile architect, and how all of these various forms interacted, because they do now. I mean, a textile architect is also looking, if you think of clothes now that preserve body temperature, or if you think of landscape architect that is actually using xeriscaping, or they're planting on top of buildings as far as your climate control, and also being able to change the amount of electricity that is used for the building. And so what I wanted to show, and I used for your online architect, which is really your web designer, web developer, a really talented man, David Kerr. I selected all of the speakers for this, David Kerr and Gigi Orbeck for the online architect. But what I wanted to show with each of these squares was, if you were looking through each square, it's a portal, and they're all connected underneath to each other. So it's not just a random disintegrated square of something. So for instance, perhaps some of the drawings that I've just drawn in pen and ink, or some of the landscape things come back into play. It might be something I never even imagined I'd be using it for, but I have what I call my library of scans. And so anytime I draw an A, and I have thousands of A's, whether I've photographed it or drawn it, it goes into a whole folder of A's. And there's literally thousands of pieces of work there. I might never use them, and I might have hundreds of circles, but there's that one perfect circle I'll use one time, or at least I think it's that one perfect circle. Sorry. Okay, so what is all of this typography and illustration and experiments? What does it actually get me? What does it equal? What do I make of all of this mess is basically what I'm asking you here. Okay, I do have actual clients, serious clients. Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton, when the Clintons left the White House, and Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright started NGO called Vital Voices. It's a NGO to promote female ambassadorships around the world. And so whenever I start any project at all, I take the main word and just type it onto the screen and look at it. And it was obvious right away that the female symbol, which is what the whole audience was geared towards to promote female voices, was built into that word. It's a funny thing, I think, is all of us as designers see patterns and are intrigued by them. So I don't even know if she remembered that I did that work, but then at least 16 years later, I got a call to be part of one of the 45 designers to design the button for the Democratic campaign, the opening night where all the new Collateral, at least on the buttons, would be presented. And they were 45 buttons because she would have been the 45th president. So immediately, again, I typed in her name, and they wanted it geared towards a younger audience. So I saw like into Clinton, and it, I sent it off, and I didn't hear anything, and 2 weeks later, I got one in the mail, done. And I'm so glad that I kerned things properly the first time I ever show it to a client, because you never know what's going to be finished. So again, a sketch that turns into a textile, that turns into a sofa for Gensler. So because of those sketches and because of some of the experiments that I post online, people see what they want to see. And thankfully, and I'm really bad about marketing myself. I can talk forever about how great my clients are, but I've never gone after a client. Everyone has found me, thankfully. And so all of these illustrations, I wasn't thinking about textiles, but now I do a lot of textile work, which is great because it's one of the few design categories that pays you a royalty, which is nice. I mean, it's not consistent, but it's like, you know, most people don't just send you money in the mail in America. So this is a cover I did for Print Magazine. It's their photography issue. Again, it was photography that the type itself was type I was already playing with in Deconstructing Type. So this is how this sort of came together. My business cards, I can't travel with them anymore. When I used to have them, well, I can't travel with them anymore after 9/11 because they're stainless steel. So, but the alphabet across the top, the J and the S is cut out because those are my initials, and all of the business and letterhead things, did I just say that? all of the business collaterals actually blind debossed, and there's hole punches as far as if it's billing or correspondence or, whatever the reason is for the collateral. I didn't put this in here. I just wanted to show a bit about how I like to incorporate materials into at least the printed pieces of my work. Who's supposed to wave to me as far as time? I'm okay? Okay. So when I had the business cards in metal, someone saw them, and it's a metal fabricator out of San Francisco called Pina Zangara, and they wanted me to do their brochure. But I know a brochure constantly changes, particularly for a product, and I know that the one huge cost for that particular type of client is for them to send samples out. So what I did is I made a piece that, and again, the drawing here, I never really knew what I would use it for, but it ended up being table of contents. And what it is a collection of about 5 by 7 inch radius corner pages that fan out and are held together by one, I can't remember what they're called now. It's a screw, but it's a particular type of screw. So that so it fans out so that the client can actually remove a page if that's not selling or that's no longer in his product line. He doesn't have to actually reprint the whole brochure. So the pages all show the product. It's a one-color job, so it's metal, and the very back cover, or the very back piece, which unfortunately I don't have here, is their actual sample of the metal that all their products are printed on. So he saves the cost of sending out all of those pieces, which is a huge savings to his company. And, of course, all the pieces are photographed. It has the product number. It has the costs throughout the back. This is another piece I've launched for 2. I don't have the collateral that goes with it, but, we do, and it has 2 books inside that are the product launch for their phone, but I just wanted to show more packaging or materials. This is a piece I particularly love. It's for a photographer. I love it because not only his photography, but it was a big experiment. If you think of ultra suede, did everyone just go, ew, really, mentally? Okay. That's another thing that I think is so ugly that it can be cool at times. So what I did is I did a registered foil stamp Dboss, but it looked horrendous. I mean, it was so ugly. So what I did with on all 2,500 samples is I removed the foil stamp with Dboss, so it looks really industrial now. So that industrial with the ultra suede has like a nice mix. I think you always have to have something really ugly with something really beautiful. Like if you think Jackie O and Aristotle, you get like that right mix. Too old a reference? Okay. So, and all the type here for this photographer is hand done. And on one side, he has 5 stories, or he has, well, 5 collections that he wanted to address. One is his tourism, one is his product, one is fashion, and one is, I can't remember the other 2. But on the other side, I hired a wonderful copywriter, and he wrote stories about really poetry that related to these areas of work. And I designed his poetry in a typographic form. So, you know, corroborations feels like something's corroborating. And so on the back, I know the market for photographers. The market is an art director. An art director keeps something on his desk if it's cool. If it's not, it's tossed. So I have to give him something for him to keep around. So this on both sides, whether he wants to steal my type or use the photographer. I don't care. I just want it to be successful for the photographer. And so these are all the different cards sort of laid out. I'm just showing you the back because it's typography. What you're seeing here is there are 2 slipcases. It's about a 100-page book, 50 in each volume, and this is the back of one of them. I launched a brand called Frida Salvador, and the interesting thing about this company is that they make shoes, and you know, I do fashion, but I do much more in the science, engineering atmosphere. But you know, luxury goods and fashion falls out from that. But I would say it's less of a percentage just because I was located in San Francisco. I happened to be in New York when this brand called me. And so I was really excited to launch them, to do their website, their logo, everything. But the funny thing was they had no shoes. But, I mean, they had no shoes at all. They had sketches of it. They had videos of them in the factory being made. But they wanted to sell to Barney's, to Jeffries, to Saks. So the initiative was to create, again, a stickiness, an amazing, which now it's all about being responsive and about user-friendly, but if you have nothing to show, you have to give them some sizzle. So I launched a site that basically had all these different sort of fun presentations about who they are, who they follow, like shoes to come, which we shot these set of Japanese very generic shoes where there was a video of one of them on the floor, then another row, and then another row, and another row. So all just very interesting things that got them past the idea that they weren't seeing any actual product. So now they actually have, they sold to Jeffries, they sold to Barney's, they're in Saks, and they have 2 stores now, their flagship stores in San Francisco. So it was fun to be part of a product from beginning to end. Now, of course, their site is all e-commerce because they don't need me anymore. Sorry. Okay, so after fashion, I was thinking, I guess my mind was still in fashion, but I've been very interested in virtual reality and artificial intelligence right now, because those are in our daily lives, I mean, everywhere, but the landscape for it is only going to grow. And as designers, how do we address that? Should we be addressing it? Who's making the decisions? How are we presenting it to the audience? And I don't know how those questions are going to be answered or what the solutions are for them. But this is actually an illustration. And so I started, again, doing illustrations that I guess people might think fashion, someone thought it was a movie still, but for me, they're created for artificial intelligence and the possibilities of how I might start using it or exploring it. I think it should be human feeling, but I don't want to fool the audience by putting a real human there. That's why it's not a photograph, it's an illustration. Oh, well, this was just in case something technically went wrong. But also, I think of days as things go really well and things go really badly, like everything else. And I think we're all fortunate that we get to do this for a living. So this is sort of my motto, and to everyone here is build your world, build the world you want. And what I consider beautiful is you and all of your experiments and compassion and empathy and solutions that you'll bring the world. And thank you so much for bringing me to India.